I was hiking through a remote part of the forest, not far from the small town where I grew up. This place was familiar to me, its towering trees, the uneven ground beneath my boots, the smell of damp earth. But that morning, something felt different. There was a strange stillness, and though I couldn't place it, I felt it deep in my gut. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear. It moved slowly through the trees, a dark, hulking shape that was hard to make out in the thick fog, and I instinctively stopped walking. I didn't want to get too close to a bear, especially not one that size. But as I stood there watching, something about it didn't seem right. Its legs were too long, its body not quite as stocky as the bears I'd seen before. And then, for just a second, it turned its head. That's when I realized it wasn't a bear at all. It had a face that was almost canine, with a long snout and sharp ears. Its movements were more agile, more deliberate, like a predator on the hunt. I'd never seen anything like it. Before I could get a better look, it disappeared into the trees. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what I'd just seen. My heart was racing, my body tense. I felt like I had just glimpsed something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world anymore. After a few minutes, I started walking again, though my mind was still replaying the image of that creature. A bear dog, I thought to myself. But that couldn't be right. Bear dogs were extinct. At least that's what we had always been told. When I got back to town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to tell someone. But who would believe me? I'd heard stories from some of the older folks, tales of strange creatures spotted deep in the forest, animals that didn't fit into any category. But most people chalked those stories up to too much time in the woods or an overactive imagination. Still, I couldn't let it go. I mentioned what I'd seen to a few people, describing the strange mix of bear and dog-like features. The reactions were mixed. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. Others looked at me with wide eyes, as if they'd heard something similar before, but didn't want to admit it. A few even shrugged it off, saying I must have been mistaken, that it was probably just a bear, or maybe a large wolf. But I knew what I saw. Over the next few weeks, whispers spread through the town. People started talking about the bear dog, though most did so with a smirk, as if it were just another tall tale to pass the time. No one had seen it since that foggy morning, and without more proof, the story began to fade. But for those of us who believed, there was a sense of unease, like the forest was hiding something just beyond our understanding. I began to dig into old records, searching for any information I could find on bear dogs. I learned that they weren't closely related to bears or dogs, despite their name. They were part of their own family, the Amphicyonidae, a group of animals that had lived millions of years ago. Fossils had been found in various parts of the world, but the last known traces of them were ancient, far too old for them to still exist today. Yet there were hints, small bits of evidence, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, they had survived in remote places for longer than anyone thought. As I read, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I'd seen was something truly special, something from a forgotten time. I imagined these creatures roaming the earth long before humans, hunting in the forests and mountains, their massive forms blending into the wilderness. They were powerful, ancient predators, and if even one had survived, it would be a miracle of nature. Days turned into weeks, and though I searched the forest on and off, I never saw the bear dog again. Others in town claimed they'd seen strange tracks or heard unfamiliar sounds at night, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. It was as if the creature had vanished back into the shadows, leaving only questions in its wake. Maybe the bear dog is gone for good, or maybe it's still out there, living in the deepest parts of the forest, unseen and unknown. Either way, I'll never forget the feeling of seeing something that shouldn't have been there, something that belonged to another time. And every time I hike through those misty woods, I can't help but look over my shoulder, just in case. It was just another day on the job, or so I thought. As a park ranger, I had spent years patrolling these woods, walking the same trails, watching the same trees sway in the breeze. Nothing really surprised me anymore, until that day. I had twisted my ankle earlier while stepping over a fallen branch. It wasn't serious, but it hurt enough that I needed to take a break. I found a quiet spot away from the main trail, a little clearing surrounded by thick trees. The air was fresh, and the sound of birds chirping calmed me as I sat down on a large moss-covered rock to rest. I was in no rush to get back. The ankle wasn't going to heal itself in a few minutes, so I leaned back and closed my eyes, taking in the forest's rhythm. The wind rustled through the leaves above me, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful, like it always did out here. That's why I loved my job. No matter how stressful life could be, the forest always had a way of reminding me that everything would be okay. But then something strange happened. I heard a soft rustling, different from the usual forest sounds. I thought it was just a squirrel or maybe a deer passing through the underbrush. I opened my eyes, curious but not concerned. After all, I'd seen every kind of wildlife these woods had to offer, or so I thought. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, ferns, and shadows. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something moving. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head, trying not to make any sudden movements. And that's when I saw it. Standing just a few feet away, near the edge of the clearing, was a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was a huge creature. Its skin was rough and green, like the bark of a tree, with scales that shimmered slightly in the dappled sunlight. I could see its long, muscular arms hanging at its sides, fingers tipped with sharp, dark claws. Its legs were bent, almost like those of a large lizard, and its feet were wide and flat, gripping the ground with a silent ease. But what struck me the most was its face. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. Its eyes were almost too large for its head, and they glowed faintly with a golden hue. A long, pointed snout jutted from its face, lined with sharp teeth that glistened as it breathed in and out, slow and steady. Two slits for a nose flared slightly as it took in the forest air. Its entire presence was unsettling, and yet it didn't seem aggressive. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I just stared at the creature, too stunned to make a sound, too shocked to do anything but watch. The forest around us had gone completely silent, as if even the birds and insects were waiting to see what would happen next. The creature stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few seconds. It didn't seem to notice me at first, or maybe it did, and just didn't care. It was hard to tell. Its eyes scanned the clearing, slowly, almost lazily, as if it was looking for something. Then, its gaze shifted, and for the briefest of moments, it locked eyes with me. I don't know why, but in that instant, I felt like it was seeing right through me. Not just looking at me, but really seeing me, my thoughts, my fears, everything. It was like nothing else mattered, except for that connection between us. And then the moment passed. The creature blinked, a slow, deliberate movement, and turned away. Without making a sound, it stepped into the shadows, its long tail dragging behind it, leaving faint marks in the soft dirt. I watched as it moved, graceful and silent, disappearing into the thick trees as if it had never been there at all. I sat there. Had I really just seen what I thought I saw? Was it real? Or was it some kind of trick my mind was playing on me? I had heard stories, of course. Every park ranger has. tales of strange creatures, of things that lurk in the woods that no one can explain. But I had never believed them. Not really. Now, though, I wasn't so sure. I stayed in the clearing for a while longer, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My ankle still ached, but I hardly noticed it anymore. My partner and I decided to go on a trip to a quiet, unknown place. We drove with no real plan until we found ourselves in a tiny town, far from everything. It was the kind of place where fewer than 1,000 people lived. There were just a few stores, one hotel, and many old buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched for years. We checked into a hotel, which had 3 floors. Our room was on the 2nd floor, and to our surprise, it was nice. It was clean, the bed was fine, and the carpet wasn't dirty. From the big window, we could see the main street of the town. While I was looking out the window, something strange caught my eye. There was a large tree across the street, and in it, something was sitting on a branch, staring at me. It was gray and had huge, creepy eyes. But the more I looked, the less real it seemed. It felt like it didn't belong. My partner finished unpacking and came over to see what I was staring at. I tried to show him the strange figure in the tree, but by the time he looked, it was gone. He didn't see anything, and I started to wonder if I imagined it. That night, as we were lying in bed, there was a strange tapping noise on the window. When I looked, I saw a branch moving, but there was no wind. The air was completely still. I was scared but tried to calm down. I looked again later, but nothing seemed wrong. My partner tried to reassure me, though he didn't sound very confident himself. Then he said something odd about being kept safe. It didn't make sense, and it gave me chills. Maybe this town was stranger than it seemed. The next morning, we had breakfast at the hotel's diner. Afterward, we walked around to explore the town. Most shops were closed, but we found an old general store. Inside, the floors creaked and everything looked faded with age. While my partner searched for snacks, I noticed a stuffed monkey on a shelf. Its red eyes looked just like the eyes of the thing I saw in the tree the night before. My heart raced. Was someone playing tricks on us, or was this all just a coincidence? I tried to get my partner to see the connection, but he wasn't interested. He thought I was being silly, so I wandered the store alone. An old woman came in and gave me a strange, knowing smile. That's when I started to wonder if the people in this town knew something we didn't. After that, we stayed in the hotel for the rest of the day. The following morning, my partner woke up early. He said he'd heard scratching noises on the window all night. And now, there was scratching coming from several windows, even from the bathroom, which was strange because we were on the 2nd floor. We both decided it was time to leave. As we were checking out, the hotel manager asked if we enjoyed our stay. My partner said it was fine, but I couldn't help asking, "Is there anything strange about this town?" The manager just smiled and said every small town had its quirks. There was something in his eyes that made me wonder if he was hiding something. The drive back home was quiet. Both of us were lost in our thoughts. I kept replaying everything, trying to make sense of it. A few days later, I still felt uneasy, so I did some research online. The town barely existed on the map, and there was no information about it. Eventually, I found an old online post from someone who had visited the same town. He described a similar experience of feeling watched. One comment on the post stood out. "Some places are best left alone." I never imagined something like this could happen in real life. It sounds so strange, but I truly believe my friend and I saw something incredible that night. My name is Sarah, and I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. Now I live with my husband and 2 grown kids on a large, wooded property near Woodruff, South Carolina. My best friend Rachel lives about a mile away with her boyfriend, Adam. One day, Rachel called me and said she had found strange footprints around her house, which is surrounded by thick woods. She described them as huge, almost like something from a gorilla. That evening, we met up just before dusk. We decided to follow the footprints into the woods with flashlights. The guys stayed behind, thinking we were just being silly. We started walking, following the big prints, when suddenly we noticed another set of footprints. These looked more like normal human boot prints walking alongside the big ones. At first, we thought someone was playing a prank on us. We kept going deeper into the forest, a place where hardly anyone goes except for hunters. The situation got stranger. There were small footprints everywhere, but then they disappeared too. We were confused, but continued walking through the dense trees, wondering who or what could have made those prints. Then, out of nowhere, we smelled something really strong. It was musky and skunky at the same time. Not long after, we heard a noise behind us. It sounded like a growl or grunt. We froze, completely terrified. It was pitch black, except for the beams of our flashlights, and we had no idea what made that sound or where it was coming from. We both stood still, turning around slowly to see if we could spot anything. Suddenly, something big jumped up from the ground right in front of us and ran away, crashing through the bushes. We screamed and thought it had to be a person messing with us, but it moved so fast that we couldn't see what it was. We even wondered if the guys had decided to play a trick on us. But then we heard more noises from the same direction. It sounded like tree branches breaking or rocks being thrown. Everything was chaotic and confusing. After a few moments, the forest went silent again. I looked at Rachel, who was staring straight ahead into the dark without saying a word. I asked if she thought someone was following us. She shook her head and said there was no way anyone could move that quickly. We agreed it was best to head back since the whole situation was becoming too creepy. But before we left, I wanted to take a closer look at the footprints. Sure enough, we found 2 sets of prints again, side by side, leading deeper into the forest. The smaller prints looked like men's boots, but the larger ones were bare feet, much bigger than any human's feet. It seemed like someone had been walking around with huge shoes, while another person followed in normal boots. But why? And where had they gone? We decided not to go any further. It was just too weird, and we were feeling uneasy. We headed home, relieved that nothing bad had happened. Still, the whole experience was hard to shake off. I tried convincing myself it was just a prank, but it all felt too bizarre to be a simple joke. A few days later, Rachel called again. She said she had heard more strange noises coming from the woods at night and was too scared to go outside alone. I offered to stay with her since Adam was working the night shift. She was glad for the company. That night, nothing strange happened, but early the next morning, just before sunrise, we woke up to loud crashing sounds nearby. Then we heard howls echoing through the forest. It terrified us, especially after reading online that there had been many Bigfoot sightings in South Carolina. When Adam got home, he suggested we call the local authorities. Maybe they could figure out what was going on. Luckily, he believed us. But when we reported it, the police didn't take it seriously. Since we had no real proof besides footprints and noises, they told us it was probably just animals causing trouble. Years ago, when I was just 19, I did something that still makes me shake my head. I was driving back to my hometown in New Hampshire after visiting a friend. It was late in the afternoon, right around sunset, and I had about a 2-hour drive ahead of me. Unfortunately, my radio had been broken for weeks, so I wasn't looking forward to the quiet drive. About 15 minutes into the drive, I saw a woman on the side of the road, and the car in front of me nearly hit her. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to stop and see if she needed help. I pulled over, got out of the car, and slowly walked towards her. I asked if she was okay and if she needed a ride. She nodded and quietly got into the passenger seat. I was relieved to have someone to talk to. The thought of driving in silence was making me dread the journey. Before getting back into the car, I glanced around to make sure everything looked safe. Then I started driving. At first, we made small talk and she began opening up a little bit. I noticed that she had a bit of an accent, something that made me think she wasn't from around here. As we talked, I didn't pay much attention to her outfit, but as the light from the car got brighter, I saw that she was wearing an old-fashioned dress, something people would have worn a long time ago. I joked, "Do you work at one of those historic places where everyone dresses like they're from the past?" She gave me a confused look and then turned her eyes back to the road. I shrugged, thinking maybe she didn't get the joke or wasn't in the mood to laugh. I pointed to the broken radio and apologized that we couldn't listen to any music. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her lips moving, and to my surprise, the radio suddenly turned on. I was shocked. "Wow, you fixed it. Thanks," I exclaimed. She frowned, looked at the radio, and asked, "You call this a radio?" I nodded, feeling a little weird. She inspected it like she had never seen one before. "Have you never seen a radio before?" I asked. She shook her head and said, "I've only ever heard music at church." Her clothes and the way she talked made me think she might be Amish or something, living a more traditional lifestyle. "Well, you can try finding a station," I told her, showing her how to turn the dial. But no matter what we tried, all we got was static. "Sorry, I guess it's still broken," I said. A few minutes later, I saw a light ahead on the road. As we got closer, I realized it was a man standing in the middle of the road, holding a torch. I slowed the car down, thinking, "What in the world is this guy doing? That's so dangerous." I stopped about 100 feet away from him. I looked over at the woman and her face had gone pale. It was clear this was someone she recognized and not in a good way. I whispered, "I'll just drive around him. It might be a little rough, but we'll get past him." She took a deep breath and said, "No, I have to face him." She got out of the car and started walking toward him. I rolled down my window, just enough to hear what they were saying. Suddenly she shouted, "I've done nothing wrong. You have no reason to accuse me of being a witch." She raised her arms and yelled. The man's voice boomed back, "You've practiced dark arts, and the witnesses haven't denied it. You will burn for your crimes, witch." I slumped down in my seat, wanting to drive off but not knowing if I should leave her there. What was going on? Was she really Amish? Why was he calling her a witch? As I was processing all this, I noticed a group of men with torches approaching from behind my car. It was too late to drive off without hitting someone, so I made a split-second decision and ran to the woman's side. I didn't understand their argument, but I knew she was in danger. I grabbed her hand and we ran into the forest. We sprinted for what felt like forever, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, we ducked behind a large tree, gasping for breath. I glanced back, but we didn't see or hear anyone following us. She looked at me, seeing the confusion on my face. "If I told you I was a witch, would you be scared of me?" she asked. I was still catching my breath, but I managed to say, "You haven't done anything to hurt me, so no, I'm not scared." I paused for a moment before asking, "If you're a witch, does that mean you're not from now?" She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'm not alive, but I'm not really dead either. I'm stuck between worlds. Salem was my home, but everything was taken from me." She explained that she was indeed a witch, but not an evil one. The man we saw on the road was someone she had been promised to marry, but when she refused him, he accused her of witchcraft out of spite. It was a lie, but no one believed her. I felt sorry for her. "What's your name?" I asked. "Margaret Holton," she replied. "And the man I loved was named William Lockhart." I laughed a little. "That's funny. My last name is Lockhart too." She looked at me, her eyes widening. She leaned in closer, studying my face. Yes, I see it now. "You have the same features," she said softly, turning my chin slightly. "You are my descendant," she whispered, before disappearing right in front of me. I stumbled back, completely stunned. Had I really just seen that? I made my way back to my car, which was still parked in the middle of the road. The men and the torches were gone. Everything was calm again.